Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today we are exploring the question, what is Bitcoin? And it's a great question, and this video was inspired by a conversation I had a couple days ago with a friend of mine, and he is what we call a no-coiner. He has no Bitcoins. And I said, why don't you have any Bitcoins? And he said, I just don't get it. And I think that is a perfectly valid reason, and I also think it is the most common reason that people don't have any Bitcoin. So I decided to make this video, and hopefully it helps to clarify what Bitcoin is and what it isn't, and some ways of thinking about it. One thing I'll say before we take a look at this list is that the process of learning about Bitcoin is a long one. There is no one single video or one single resource that will all of a sudden make sense, and then you're like, okay, I get it, end of story. It's just not going to happen. There's nobody for whom that was the case. So you can read the Bitcoin Whitepaper, and by the way, I'll put a link to that in the description. You can watch videos, you can read books, listen to podcasts, whatever. For me, it took a year of learning about Bitcoin before I finally had the conviction to buy some. And that was a sequence of a lot of little epiphanies along the way leading up to a big one where I thought, oh man, okay, this could work, right? This could be something. And I still have more epiphanies even now that I've bought Bitcoin and used it. So this video is just one of many that might help, and I want to provide several different ways of thinking about Bitcoin, and there's no one correct way. That's really important to keep in mind. There's a lot of ways to think about Bitcoin, and some people are so funny in how determined they'll be that it is this or it's not that, and really hardcore. So in reality, it's everything is sort of a gray area. You got to figure out what makes sense to you, that is also truthful. And understanding how other people think about it is also very helpful. So let's get into it. First of all, is Bitcoin a coin? Well, okay, Bitcoin. I mean, however, I don't want to confuse you, but I would personally almost say no, it's not a coin, and that's going to sound super confusing off the bat. I apologize. Please stay with me. Let me just talk about these other two and then come back to this. Is it a ledger? Yes, it's a ledger. It's a way of keeping track of things. And one of many reasons that Bitcoin is so powerful and such a big breakthrough is that it uses one single shared ledger. It is a decentralized ledger, meaning everybody has it, everybody has access to it. It's public, meaning anybody can view it. Even people who don't own Bitcoins can still go look at the ledger. And it has other properties too, like it is immutable, it is uncensorable, decentralized, I said, it's open, public, right? It's borderless. So it's insanely cool in those ways. And this ledger solves the problem that we've had for thousands of years, which is the dual ledger problem of accounting. So basically, if I pay you something, like if I give you $20 and I write down in my account, I gave you $20, and then you write down, thanks, you gave me $20. If we both write down the same thing, great, there's no problem. That's how most transactions work. But eventually, what if there's a dispute? Like, hey, I gave you $100. No, you didn't. You only gave me 20. Well, it says here in my ledger I gave you 100. Whatever. And then what do you do when there's a disagreement? There's a lot of ways to solve that problem. You can appeal to a third party, some authority figure, or a legal representative, a judge, something like that. You could get out your 6-shooter, right? You've got all these different ways in the old Wild West. So there's a lot of ways to resolve that, but basically the way accounting has worked from person to person or business to business or whatever is a dual ledger system where basically both people on both sides of a transaction keep their own ledger. And then if there's a disagreement, well, they've got to come up with some way of solving it. Bitcoin is very, very interesting because there's only one ledger and everybody shares it. And so we all agree that that is the ledger. So if there's a disagreement, we just look at the ledger. Now, there's something I'm not going to go into today, although I'll hint at it and say that there are rules for when we disagree over what the one ledger is, right? And this happens pretty frequently. We disagree. Like, is this the real ledger or is this the real ledger? Not quite every 10 minutes, but, frequently. And there are rules for determining which ledger is the one true ledger, and the answer is basically the longest one, the longest ledger, the one with the most pages in it, or the most blocks on the blockchain. So I'm not going to go into all that today, but let's just say there are rules. And so yes, moving down here, Bitcoin is a protocol. It's a set of rules, just like HTTP, like the internet, and TCP IP, like hypertext transfer protocol, HTTP, like that's just a set of rules. And we have a set of rules for so many things we do in society. These are just protocols. It's like, which side of the road do you drive on? Well, in the United States, you drive on the right side. In the United Kingdom, left side, and so on. Different rules around the world. But there are different protocols for different things we do. Going back here, Bitcoin is also a payment network. This is very interesting because the asset, Bitcoins, and the payment network, Bitcoin, are interconnected, like they're intertwined. In the case of dollars, okay, these are dollars. We could say it's like a coin or a note, right? It's, the thing we move back and forth. But this, what I'm holding here, it's not a payment network. It's not a payment network. I can just hand this to you, okay, and then now it's yours, but there's no payment network involved. Bitcoin is very cool, revolutionary in the sense that the payment network and the ledger and the coin are all intertwined into the same thing, like the same chunk of code. So there was something else I wanted to say here. Yeah, I wanted to go back and address, like, is Bitcoin a coin? Well, let me write something here. You'll see a lot of people refer to Bitcoin with a capital B as the payment network, and Bitcoin with a lowercase b as the coin, like the asset that moves back and forth. I don't really do that most of the time. I basically use a capital B all the time, and you kind of have to figure out from context if I'm talking about the payment network or the coin itself, but that's really not a big deal in my opinion. Why do I mention that? Because I almost think the coin itself, it almost doesn't exist. And I know a lot of you guys are new to Bitcoin. That might be super weird to wrap your head around. But at the same time, it might be helpful. It might be helpful, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. And the analogy that I just came up with today is like a game of football. You score points, but what is a point? Does a point exist? I mean, like, hang on, think about that. What I'm going to do here is just kind of make an analogy with this column of 5 things to a game of football, so you see what I mean, and hopefully it helps you understand Bitcoin. If not, well, you can forget it. But let me see here. So the coin, this would be like points. I can just do it here. Points. The ledger, this is the scoreboard. The payment network, interesting. Okay, what's the payment network? I mean, it's almost like the field. I'm not super happy with that analogy. Because obviously in a game of football, you can't transfer points. Like, hey, here's 3 points for your team. You can't do that. You got to earn it. So the analogy kind of breaks down here. But hang on. So the protocol, the rules, I mean, this is basically like the rule book. And the white paper, which I didn't really comment on, The white paper is the original vision for the project that's just kind of written in essay form, like, it could be 5 pages, 10 pages, whatever. I forget how long the Bitcoin white paper is, but I will put a link to it in the description. And it's basically like the vision for the project from the beginning before you actually build the project. So this is sort of like a business plan. In the case of football, it's like, hey, let's get these two teams together, and they wear equipment, and they, run the ball and pass the ball, and they try to move it a certain distance down the field, and then we give them points. Right? So what's a point? Well, don't worry about what a point is, but let me tell you how you get 3 of them, and then I'll tell you how you get 6 of them, and then 1 more, or sometimes 2 more. Right? So like there's all these rules for how you get points, but like what is a point? It's almost like Bitcoin works the same way. There's rules for how you get a Bitcoin. There's rules for how you spend them. But like, what is the coin? Like, it's not like a thing, just like a point in a game. So hopefully that makes sense. One last thing I'll say here about the white paper is that there's a lot of people who say, they criticize Bitcoin. They say, man, Bitcoin isn't anything like the white paper, right? Written in 2008, and here we are in 2020. It doesn't look anything like it. And it's certainly looking like it's going to keep evolving and changing little by little. And people criticize that and say it's a bad thing. Well, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter what the original white paper was like, just like the original business plan for the NFL or for whatever, or for a business. It doesn't really matter if things change along the way, in my opinion, right? That's not a valid criticism. So anyways, all right, moving on. Let's go to the second column. Currency. Is Bitcoin a currency? Well, if you've seen my video on the difference between money and currency, I will put a link to that in the description as well. You know that I think Bitcoin is not a currency and probably never will be. So even though it's called a cryptocurrency, I don't think it's a currency because of how I define currency. So I would be inclined to cross this out. And my marker turned into an eraser, which is very impressive. Okay, I think I've had the cap off for too long. Anyways, so I don't think Bitcoin is a currency, and even though it's called a cryptocurrency, and it's also called a Bitcoin, and I almost wouldn't say that there are coins that exist. So I know that's a little weird, but hopefully this helps. Is it world money? Certainly not yet. Of course, it's not money yet. Again, if you want to know the difference between currency and money, go watch that video. It's a long one, I think 37 minutes, but it's a summary of what I've been learning over 10 years. I mean, there is so much in it. It is so dense. I think it is extremely valuable, and I encourage you to watch it as many times as you need to until it sinks in. And if you disagree with anything there, I have an open mind, so please, write me a comment, and I'll elaborate or consider anything that you guys give me as feedback. So I don't think Bitcoin is world money yet, but it could be. As far as I'm aware, the only world money that has ever existed is gold. And most people in the world have not been using money the last 50 years or so, basically since 1971. So we've really forgotten as a society, we've forgotten what money is and why it's important, and we just use this and we call it money, but it is not money. It is something very different. Yeah, so definitely go back and watch that video. I think Bitcoin could potentially surpass gold as world money, but it will be very difficult. It'll be an uphill struggle for sure. And personally, I own Bitcoin. It's my largest position, and gold is my second largest position. I have a feeling it's going to be that way for a long time. So even if Bitcoin, becomes world money or surpasses gold in market cap, which will probably take 20 years if it happens, I'll probably still continue to own both because there's just a really large amount of risk to Bitcoin. There's just a lot of risk there. It could definitely fail. Is Bitcoin a revolution? Yes, 100%. 100%. The way I'm thinking about Bitcoin right now, because I no longer have a beginner's mindset. I'm not, coming at this for the first time. But the way I'm thinking about it now is that Bitcoin is a revolution. I did not always see it that way, but this is how I think about it now. And if someone mentions Bitcoin, the first place my head goes is this. Because I think the movement that is unfolding is the separation of money and state. Just like we had a separation of church and state many years ago, where basically, okay, we can have a country, but the people in charge of it don't impose their religion on the citizens, right? Everyone can choose their own religion. Religion is not intertwined into the government itself. I think we're seeing a similar movement between money and state, where, okay, yeah, there can be a government and so forth, right? There can be, presidents and whatever, Congress, Supreme Court, doesn't matter. However, each country is set up. There can be all these governments. However, they don't need to issue their own currency or money or whatever. So I think we are witnessing a revolution of world money with all these properties, and the ones I listed earlier, like open, right? Open, public, immutable, borderless, uncensorable, decentralized, ledger. Okay, basically a scoreboard of who has done what nice things for other people, right? And we give them points, or we give them bitcoins, which aren't really defined, but there are rules around how you get them and how many there can be. Right, unlike in a game, there's no limit to how many points you get, like in a game of football or something. But there's rules there, and so we know that if someone, gives you a Bitcoin, you know that they did a certain amount of work to acquire it, either by mining it themselves or by whatever, earning it or trading for it or, giving up this garbage for it, whatever. So anyways, I do think Bitcoin is a revolution. In my mind, that's the most powerful thing. Is it an idea? Yeah, absolutely, it's an idea, and this is definitely a bit more philosophical, in the way that anything is an idea. Like if I say tree, is a tree an idea? You'd be like, no, a tree is that thing right there. Okay, but it's also an idea. So if I ask you to define a tree or describe it or draw it or whatever, yours would be different than mine, and mine would be different than somebody else's, and every single person would have a different thing. So in that sense, a tree is an idea that we all have in common to an extent, but also disagree on in really, really small ways. So that's true of freedom, right? What is freedom? Okay, you can define it. You can give me an example. You can say, well, that situation there, that's not freedom, or this over here, this is freedom, and so forth. And, I could do that. Everyone could do that. We would all disagree a little bit about what constitutes freedom, just like what's a tree, just like what is Bitcoin. We would all disagree, like, in little ways about what it is and what it isn't. And I only mention that because it's a lot of times those tiny little differences that people are most vocal about. And so if you hear that on Twitter or in YouTube videos or whatever, maybe if you consider the fact that Bitcoin is an idea and that people tend to be loudest about the tiniest things, you might be able to look past those small things that are loudest and focus on what's in common. Like, what does everyone perceive about Bitcoin that they agree on? Maybe focus on that. That might be helpful for you. Is it a cult? Maybe. I guess it depends on your definition of a cult, but there's certainly a lot of cult-like elements. There are certainly subcults within Bitcoin. Definitely. Is Bitcoin as a whole a cult? I'll leave that one up to you to decide. You let me know in the comments. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope these perspectives were valuable. In my subsequent videos, we can talk more about some high-level things. We can drill down a little bit deeper. We can talk about some objections that people have to Bitcoin and why it's definitely no good, or why Bitcoin Cash is better, or Bitcoin SV. I'm thinking here about this white paper, whatever. We can talk about a lot of things. So if you have questions, if there's things you want to learn about, sooner rather than later, let me know in the comment section. I'd be happy to make a video on it just for you. So thanks, guys. See you in the next one.